I'm Diane Sawyer, and it's Tuesday, September 11th, 2001.
It is beautiful outside, perfect September day with lots of sunshine. Oh, would you look at Washington, huh?
Other than that, it's kind of quiet around the country. We like quiet. It's quiet. It's too quiet.
This just in, you were looking at obviously a very disturbing live shot there. Plane has crashed into the...
Jumping out the window.
Never seen anything. Apparently.
Being born in 1999, I've basically grown up with travesty after travesty. The 2008 recession that caused many of us to become homeless, the constant threat of nuclear war and being drafted, and in some cases, I was way too small to remember, as was the case with the attacks on 9/11. And it's that last one that I always felt kind of detached from. Every year, like clockwork, on September 11th, whoever was my teacher that year would sit everyone down and make us watch the raw 9/11 footage in class to pay respects. And although it's quite apparent what emotion you should be feeling when you watch this, it never really garnered any kind of emotional reaction from me beyond being confused as to why my teacher was showing me this. Even as a kid, I was desensitized to this kind of thing, but as I got older and grew a heart, I began to feel for the victims' lives that were taken on that fateful day. Since then, I've seen many different angles of that incident, and with each new angle, my heart broke little by little. Some don't even realize that there's more than one video of the events that transpired that day, let alone knowing that there's footage taken from inside of the World Trade Center. And it's this footage that will be the main focus of this section because it's as gut-wrenching as you can imagine. What you're watching comes straight from the archive of Jules and Gideon Naudet, otherwise known as the Naudet brothers, an aspiring duo looking to make a name for themselves by producing a documentary on firefighters in New York. And as interesting as a documentary about firefighters sounds, it wasn't too eventful. In fact, the only reason we're talking about it right now is because Jules Naudet got so bored filming the first few months that one random day, he decided he wanted to film some action and chose to accompany the Firehouse Battalion Chief Joseph Pfeiffer, while his brother Gideon stayed behind to film Tony, the main focus of the documentary. All that Pfeiffer was called out to do during this day was to solve an issue of a simple gas leak somewhere in Manhattan. Little did Jules know they would be driving directly into one of history's most intense incidents. Not only were they right on the scene of the attacks, but they were smack dab in the center of what would become known as Ground Zero. Jules is on the scene with Battalion Chief Joseph Pfeiffer, while his brother Gideon is on the way filming Tony. All the while, both made sure to capture the scene in its entirety. And it wasn't pretty. The reason you haven't heard of this footage until now is because it's way darker than it lets on. Just skimming through, you can find remnants of some horrific stuff. For example, during this scene right here, when they first enter the World Trade Center, although it's not explicitly shown on screen, Jules Naudet explained during the documentary that he made that upon entry to his right were two people completely on fire.
I go in and I hear screams, and right to my right there is two people on fire, burning. I just didn't want to film that. It was like no one should see this.
Obviously, these two people were desperately in need of help, but deemed by the team of firefighters to be in such bad condition from burns that it was nearly impossible to bring them back. So the team just left them there to rot and suffer. And to be completely fair, this isn't their fault. I'm sure most of us wouldn't know what to do either and end up doing the same exact thing. But I mention this because this was the scene they were in. It was straight out of a nightmare, and it was the kind of thing that would unfortunately just leave you speechless. It wasn't until they were all inside the building that they realized the severity of what exactly was going on. A plane really had just flown directly into one of the towers, and it wasn't too long until they received word on their radio of another flying in to take out the other. It was in this moment that Joseph Pfeiffer, the battalion chief, was at a true loss for words as he realized there wasn't going to be much to do besides run and hope you didn't get crushed. And when you're watching the raw footage with nothing to hear but the sounds of concrete and rubble falling down with the occasional breaks in audio, of gaffs of air from those in the scene, and just the utter chaos. Have you noticed that sound that keeps coming from the outside? Yeah, that noise right there that sounds like glass breaking or something falling. Yeah, those are people. Specifically those trapped at the top who didn't want to die from the fire and chose to jump instead. It's these little details that really put you into perspective of those that were there on the scene on ground zero, helping everyone out as best they could. Like many of you, whenever 9/11 was mentioned or brought up, I didn't think too much of it. I just put it into that chaos category that it keeps so many things in. It wasn't until I watched this footage that I realized just how scary it must have been to be there in person, let alone be someone that was trapped inside the building. Luckily, those with jewels managed to make it out alive, but you can see just the absolute destruction that took place a few moments ago. I mean, just look at the difference between the before and after the second plane hit. It's night and day. And a few blocks away, capturing history down on the streets of Manhattan, was Gideon and Tony, who were just now responding to the chaos. However, it's to my knowledge that Gideon's footage has never been released, with the exception of being his POV shot of the tower being hit. I hope I was able to shed some light on the topic that I feel like was never fully explained when I was in school, beyond just showing us the footage of the plane hitting. My condolences to anyone who's watching that may have had a family member or friend that was caught in the middle of this truly tragic story.
My name's Eli Clayton, aka True Boy, and I'm here to win the Madden Challenge. I took a break from Madden.
So we're going to be shifting a bit in topic here, as we're going to be entering the world of competitive gaming. I myself have mentioned this many times on the channel, but I play a little known game called Super Smash Bros. Melee. That 22-year-old game that's got to be played on one of these. And I can tell you from my experience of playing the game competitively, going to tournaments all over California and out of state, that competition isn't always fun. In fact, a lot of the first initial 5 years that I played was full of disappointment and, honestly, anger. I hated losing, and I've had my fair share of outbursts. But of course, all of my outbursts were done in my car on the way home. But for some people, it's not unusual to be a bit more public with their loss, as was the case for David Katz, a 24-year-old professional Madden player from Baltimore, Maryland, that will unfortunately be the main focus of this story. Why, unfortunately? Well, I'll get there. But before we do, I want to be fair to David. I think it's only fair that I give his side of the story because I can't in good faith not share it. So, leading up to the events of the Madden tournament that would forever change the lives of 3 people, it's important that we discuss David's mental health situation at this point in time. We know this thanks to some court documents from one of the victims that sued the game bar this took place at. According to the preceding court documents, it's public information that David was struggling with a lot of mental health issues. Noted under Section 46, we get an apt description of David's current situation. David Katz was by all accounts an introvert and an unusual young man. He rarely spoke and did not interact with his fellow gamers in a normal way. Katz had prior outbursts with his parents when they tried to take away his video games and was prescribed a number of psychiatric medications, including antipsychotics and antidepressants, and had been treated with a psychiatrist for much of his life. So from this alone, we know that David Katz was mentally not well leading up to the events that took place on the night of August 29th, 2018. At this point in the story, our attention should be directed towards 2 people, Elijah Clayton, otherwise known as True Boy 818, and his fellow competitor, Taylor Robertsons, better known as Spot Me Please. Let's start with True Boy. Elijah Clayton, a 22-year-old from Woodland Hills, California, had been playing Madden for years at this point, starting in high school and coming back to it during his college years simply because he had the free time to do so. And in the short time that he was back, he was making a name for himself. Now, he wasn't mind-blowingly good, and there was no Cinderella runs on his end, but he was starting to garner success over his mad consistency in the game, picking up solid wins at the Madden Classic events leading up to a semi-final finish at Madden 18 Ultimate League. Just losing shy of finals to Drini, another top player well known in the community. Despite the disappointing loss at the Ultimate League, things were looking up for Elijah as he'd continue competing, as well as picking up a few haters, and even more so, fans, from his performance. The next thing on Elijah's mind was the Madden Classic League, with qualifiers happening from August 21st to late September, with everyone competing for a shot at the offline finals set to take place in Vegas just a month after. But these qualifiers wouldn't be easy, as this obviously drew the attention of so many other players, including our other main focus of this tragic story, Taylor Spot Me Please Robertson, a well-known Madden player and beloved husband and father. His journey to the top of the Madden scene started with his incredible win at the Madden 17 Classic in 2016. He was quite passionate not just towards football, but his love of the competition that Madden brought into his life, amassing well over $80,000 in winnings during his time at the top. Taylor would be going into these qualifiers with one thing on his mind: land a spot at Vegas and take his already successful career that much higher. And so, every top player imaginable was there, with our two talked about players catching their flights down to Jacksonville, Florida to attend what would end up being their last tournament ever. August 29th, 2018. Everyone is mentally preparing themselves for finals day after a grueling day of group play on the previous night. True Boy manages to get ahead, winning his first match, with Spot Me Please falling in round 1 of the single elimination bracket. And it's here that we get our first break in this story, and one of the reasons I chose to cover it. A misconception I kept running into was that David Katz had lost on Sunday to True Boy, and right after losing, he left to go outside to grab his firearm and then waltzed back in with nothing but revenge on his mind. But if you take a look at the bracket, David didn't even play True Boy or Spot Me Please, the two players who would end up losing their lives during this event. At first, I had trouble finding his gamertag because, well, both of his gamertags were missing. Usually David would sign up as Ravens Champ or simply Bread, but for some reason he entered this tournament as Satiric Bulb, and he ended up losing to another player known as Boogs, full name Reginald Brown. And Brown has gone on record stating that it was no longer than 5 to 10 minutes before David walked in and gunned everybody down. And just like that, 2 lives were taken in the blink of an eye, with Katz adding himself to the count shortly after, either out of shame or it being part of his plan the entire time. When I first read this story and listened to the audio, I was shook. The only other thing that's gotten to me this bad was the Russian brick incident, and that honestly shows way more than what this video did. I think for me, it's the implication that I could be at any of these tournaments for the last time without knowing and just die. And for what, right? Just because I enjoyed playing a video game. And before we move on, I felt as though I had to mention this comment I found on an old video showing Katz' one and only big win in Madden, the Madden 17 Bills Championship. And the reason I'm talking about this comment is because the content of it entirely changes the narrative behind this story. If you go to any forum, article, or video talking about this, they will all tell you the same thing, that David only took the action he did because he was upset after losing and sought revenge on those who beat him. But after reading this comment, it completely changed my mind. And I'm not going to read out the entire comment because that's just doing too much. And honestly, you'd probably get bored. But essentially what this comment is trying to say is that David knew his place in the community. And given that, there's no way David was simply upset, and that's why he carried out this tragic event. And how do I know? Well, because after reading through David's Madden career and assessing where his skill level was, it seems like he was where I'm at in terms of my melee career. So I can give you my personal take. I'm not a top player, but if I went to any national or regional, I'd pose a potential threat to any player, even those at the tippy top. But I know I'm not going to win the tournament, right? Even though I'm ranked in California and I have the ability, if I play well enough, to win, I know it's not likely and probably won't happen. When you go to these tournaments for anything, you quickly find out how truly good or bad you are relative to everybody else. And while David did win a tournament, it wasn't stacked, and he knew this. The best players were not there, and the tournament at GLHF Game Bar was absolutely stacked. The best of the best were there, and as someone who's gone to majors of similar level, I find it extremely hard to believe that David really felt in his heart that he was going to win this one or even make it far in the tournament. Plus, he drove all the way down from his hometown of Baltimore to Jacksonville, and it's noted that he purchased the firearm he used nearly 2 weeks before the event. So a nearly 11-hour drive with a newly purchased firearm in the car. You cannot tell me this was not at the very least thought about before driving to the tournament. And this shot up red flags because the people he murdered, they didn't even play him. And why do I keep reading this everywhere? And it was in that moment that I realized just how much the media values a good headline over the facts. Here's the truth of the matter. David hadn't played anyone he took the lives of. He wasn't even projected to play them either. And I was reading all this and just going, like, are we really defending this guy in any matter? Why? Right? I understand having mental issues, and a lot of it wasn't helped by his mother, who, if anything, increased his issues by a ton. But that does not give this guy the excuse or the right to take someone's life just because he was dealt a bad hand. Imagine if a crazy homeless guy walked up to whoever you love most in the world, whether it be your mother, your father, or a close friend, or even your partner, and the homeless person just took their life and someone tried to say, well, it's not their fault. They didn't know any better. They're crazy. You'd be angry, and rightfully so. I've also heard rumors around the internet that True Boy was somehow a bully to David, but from my research, I can't even find any information that this is the case at all. To me, David seemed like he was on the outskirts of the community, and in any community, like the melee scene, there was bound to be cliques at the top level, and I see it myself whenever I go to tournaments. But I know for a fact that David wasn't included in these cliques, and in my opinion, it was by choice. From him. Every article I've read details him as a socially awkward person who just went to tournaments, competed, and went straight home without talking to anybody. And if that's how you're choosing to behave when you are quite literally in one of the most social gaming communities, I think it's on you for not making friends, or at least trying to. I just have zero sympathy for this, and if you saw the photos of the aftermath like I did, you would feel the same way. My heart goes out to anyone that was affected by this, and hopefully I was able to shed some truth on a story that I felt like was never given a proper ending. A father's love is undeniable. I've heard from a lot of fathers in my life that most dads don't feel the connection until they see their kid for the first time. But from that point on, they do whatever it takes as long as it meant this child was safe and sound. In fact, I think most good fathers out there in the world would kill for their children. As was the case quite literally for Gary Plausch, the man who killed his son's rapist. This story takes us all the way back to the 1980s. Gary and June Plausch innocently decide to enroll their kid, Jody Plausch, into some karate lessons. While at first it seems innocent enough, it was here that Jody would be introduced to the man that would soon traumatize and get to know him a little too well. The man was none other than Jody's karate instructor, Jeffrey Doucette, a 25-year-old born out of Port Arthur, Texas, that now found himself living in Louisiana and teaching karate at Red Dragon Karate School based in Baton Rouge. Unfortunately for the Plausch family, Doucette was an experienced predator, utilizing many tactics to push boundaries with Jody and slowly gain the trust of the family. If you've seen the documentary with Drake Bell, or at the very least clips of it, much of the same happened here. And for the record, before we go into detail, because I'm very comfortable sharing everything because Jody seems hell-bent on making sure his story is out there for those that may be struggling with the same thing without even knowing. He's appeared on many podcasts and interviews, retelling his experience whilst maintaining a confident and relaxed demeanor, clearly showing he understands what happened and wants to ensure that it doesn't happen to anyone else. A lot of Doucette's tactics started at the karate school. Jody explained that although it seemed normal at first, there were times he'd get stretches from Doucette that were a little too close to some areas of his body than he'd prefer, or driving Jody around town and subtly touching his lap to see how he'd react. And once Jeffrey was given enough confirmation that Jody would not in fact tell anybody and was just going to submit to whatever he did, he amped up basically everything. The next thing Jody remembers happened on a field trip where him and a few karate classmates went crawfishing with Jeff. And the sleeping arrangement had 2 kids, Jeff, and then Jody on the end. And Jody explained that Jeff would roll over and basically do whatever he wanted while he pretended to be asleep. And for those wondering why Jody didn't do anything, he had a very good explanation for all of this, well, at least in my opinion. He talks about how when you're groomed like this, it's hard to tell what is right from wrong. And also, in some weird, twisted way, he didn't want Jeff getting harmed, as he knew that his dad would do something nasty in retaliation, and just how right he was. So he never said anything, and wanted to just pretend like nothing ever happened, because that was the easiest way to go about this, at least in his 10-year-old mind. You have to remember that this only happened because Jody was 10. He was a 10-year-old without any life experience up against an experienced predator like Doucette, who sought out a very specific type of kid, right? It's not the child's fault in any way. But what's insane to me is just how calm Jody is in his current age, explaining all of this that happened to him. And throughout this entire story, Jeffrey is also dealing with some other lawsuits and charges for embezzling money, which leads to him skipping town and attempting to kidnap Jody in the process. And what jarred me was his question posted by the interviewer.
But what made him say, like, okay, I'm gonna skip town, but I'm taking you with me?
I was his love interest for the past year.
Okay.
I was his Bonnie.
I was his love interest. It didn't really hit me that this guy was genuinely obsessed with a 10-year-old boy the way a teenager obsesses over their girlfriend or boyfriend. Just absolutely fucking disgusting. Luckily, this story has somewhat of a happy ending, at least as far as endings go with these type of stories. But it would take a lot of effort before we got there. As of right now in the story, Jeffrey had been doing whatever he wanted to Jody for months, and nearing the month of February had decided to skip town and bring Jody with him. The two struggled as Jeffrey only had $550 from a Western Union order and ended up being caught due to carelessness. He ended up calling Connect, which if you don't know because you're too young or like me, you just haven't heard of it at all. It's an old system in which you could call somebody and the other person would be charged for however long the call was. Jeffrey had called Jody's mom in the hopes of collecting enough money to keep him going. But thankfully, June Plausch had the police trace the call back. It wasn't too long until there was a knock at the door and Jeffrey had been busted. All was well, as Jody had now been reunited with his parents, who had obviously been worried to death about their son.
As a parent in your position, did you learn anything from this?
Just how much I love my children. Or maybe a little bit more protective or overprotective.
And love his son he did, seeing as he ended up doing what I believe any father would at the very least think about in a time like this. He killed his son's assaulter. The day was March 16th, 1984. Jeffrey Doucette being flown back to Louisiana with the intention of facing trial, arriving at Baton Rouge Metropolitan Airport, escorted in by a handful of police officers. All seemed to be going as normal, but laid out in the back was Jody's dad, Gary Plausch, donned in a baseball cap, sunglasses, and a vengeance. It was only a matter of time for Doucette to walk right past him and give him the opportunity of a lifetime. And just like that, the man that had caused his son so much pain and agony over the last year was gone. And if you're wondering what happened to Gary Plausch, because obviously he ended up being taken to court, well, he got off with a slap on the wrist. 7 years suspended sentence with 5 years probation and 300 hours of community service. In layman's terms, nothing really happened to Gary besides going back to being a law-abiding citizen who now had more community service to do besides what he had already done. I think there's a lot to learn from this story. The biggest takeaway from me was just how hard it is as the child going through everything. The amount of mental hoops Jody jumped through as a kid to defend this awful human being is sad.
I didn't hate Jeff. I didn't want Jeff to be harmed in any way. I didn't want Jeff to go to jail. I knew if I did that, literally, I knew my dad would kill him if I would have said anything.
Right.
So I just kept it to myself, and I felt it would be best that one day this is going to stop, and then when that happens, I'll move on. But I wasn't going to say.
And I'm glad that he hasn't shut up about it, because I think him being so honest and open about it has made the world of difference for anyone who might be going through the same thing without you even knowing. Let me know your thoughts on this story, and if Gary Plow should be regarded as the hero that so many believe him to be. All I can say is that I have the utmost respect for a dad willing to go that far to get justice for their kid. Naples, 1974. Artist Marina Abramovich is gearing up to perform her latest performance art. All people can see as they walk into the room is Marina standing still as they come to a table with a note that reads, "There are 72 objects on the table that one can use on me as desired. I am the object. During this period, I take full responsibility." The most notable of the 72 objects was the presence of knives, scissors, food, water, and a lot of other things that get scarier the more you imagine what someone could do with them. The preceding 6 hours could only be summed up as torture, and the craziest part was that it was all captured on film. This is Rhythm Zero, one of the most extreme exhibits ever open to the public for a brief period of time. 6 hours to be exact. And within those 6 hours, guests of the art exhibit were allowed to do whatever they wanted to the art subject, Marina Abramovich, an artist with a mission to prove just how satanic and evil anyone can be given the right circumstances. And it all started with her Rhythm series, a series of 5 pieces all performed by yours truly. The point of this selection of performance art was for Marina to test the mental and physical limitations of her own body. She started off by shocking everyone with her first piece in the Rhythm series, Rhythm 10, which involved her playing the 5-finger game that I'm sure most of us old heads are familiar with. In case you're not, essentially you do this, but instead of a pencil, imagine something much, much sharper. She played the game with every single object in front of her and only changed to a new one once she had nicked herself, and then she ran through each object once more. This ended up catching the attention of many, as Abramovich was now seen as the hot new artist on the block, who now found herself with an audience at her next piece in the Rhythm series, Rhythm 5. Performed in 1974 at the Student Cultural Center in Belgrade, this piece involved much of the same shock factor from the first, but instead of knives, this time Abramovich was playing with fire. Quite literally. She ceremoniously built a pentagram out of wood and set it ablaze, walking around it while uncontrollably pulling pieces of her hair and throwing them into the fire to burn. It was very ritual-like in the way that she performed everything, with the showstopper being Marina sitting smack dab in the middle of the fire. Obviously, with her oxygen running low, seeing as she was surrounded by nothing but flames, she lost consciousness not too long after. One thing to note was that Marina seemed very unhappy with this performance. In her own words, "I was very angry because I understood there was a physical limit. When you lose consciousness, you can't be present, you can't perform." And she took this type of thinking to the next level with her next 3 performances in the Rhythm series. And with each one, she took things further and further, whether it be tripping on schizophrenic medicine in front of everyone, or something that I can't even show on YouTube that would take the spot of Rhythm 4. And even after the events of the focus of this video, she would go on to do many more pieces that push the limits, such as her bow and arrow piece, where her and a man hold a bow and lean far apart. This is a real bow and arrow, and had this guy at any moment let go of this, it would have pierced her straight in the heart. This is the kind of person Marina Abramovich was and still is, and Rhythm Zero was, at this point in time, her most impressive yet unsettling piece. If you were there live when it happened, you would have been greeted to Marina standing aside a massive table with 72 objects laid out, all encompassed by a single note smack dab in the center that read, "I am an object. You can do whatever you want with me. I will take all responsibility for 6 hours." And that's exactly what people did. Most started off innocently enough, handing her food, water, or simply brushing her hair or tickling her. But as innocent as these first interactions started, it wasn't long until someone did what maybe everyone was waiting for. They pushed the boundary just to see what would happen. An audience member did a light slap to Marina's face, and when she didn't resist or so much as flinch, another one came out, but this one was a bit harder. Again, she didn't move or scream or do anything, but stand there and stare blankly in front of her. Things began to quickly spiral out of control as people realized the situation at hand. This person was really going to allow anyone in this room to actually do whatever they wanted, and there was nothing she could do about it. One person grabbed a razor blade and nicked her a few times on the neck, and reportedly, and albeit disturbingly, drank her blood in the process, with another male audience member covering her face with a cloth and proceeding to essentially touch her in front of the entire audience in every spot imaginable. And at this point, you're probably wondering who was taking these photos, right? Because there's photos of the entire event that I'm showing on screen. Well, there was a camera as an object on the table that would print the pictures as you took them. And this one guy began photographing everything that was happening and then giving the pictures to Marina to hold to showcase the pain that she was enduring. One guy up and grabbed a live firearm off the table and aimed it straight at Marina's dome. And at this point in my research, it really felt like people were just doing whatever they could to entertain themselves with Marina. She was left bruised, scarred, and at one point, one of the men in the audience cut up her clothes, so she was just out in the open like that. It was the most disturbing 6 hours you can imagine, and I know a lot of you would call Marina Abramovich insane for even attempting this. Some of you might even say that she brought this on herself. But did she really? Nowhere in the exhibit did it say for people to do what they did to her, right? They chose to do that. Nobody was told to grab the razor blade or the gun or the scissors or the hundreds of other things that were done to her. They all willingly chose it. Of course, I'm smart enough to understand that it was heavily implied for the audience to do things like this to her, because otherwise, why even put those objects out in the first place? But the fact that the people considered doing that just because the objects were present is insane. Right? There was literally zero reason for any of that to occur. It really shows that when people truly see anything as nothing more than an object, all morals fly out the window, and that's scary as hell. What was truly unsettling was when the time ran out of the exhibit and they closed up shop. Marina returned to her normal self, talking and moving like any other person would at that point. And she said when she did this, almost everybody in the room fanned out because they were obviously too ashamed to take responsibility for what they made her go through for 6 hours. And what's crazy is that this isn't even the piece that broke her. It's true. The only time Marina has ever been broken out of her focused art mode is during what many would call her tamest performance art. Now, because of how successful Marina has been in her art career, she was given a retrospective art exhibit where museum goers would be able to experience some of her famous works from the past live in the flesh. And to crown the entire thing would be Marina herself doing another new performance art that has come to be known as a minute of silence. Anyone in the exhibit was allowed to sit with her for as long as they'd like in silence. And on opening night of the retrospective, while Marina was up there performing Minute of Silence, she got an unexpected visitor, Frank Lizapen, or better known by his artist name of Ule. And you've already seen this guy once before. He was Marina's well-known partner and longtime companion that performed many pieces with her, like the bow and arrow piece from earlier. The two did many projects together throughout her career, and when their relationship unfortunately came to an end, they decided to go out with a bang and embarked on the Great Wall Walk. The two would start on either side of the Great Wall of China, and after a grueling 90-day excursion, they met directly in the middle, only to part ways after. Fast forward 22 years from the Great Walk in 1988 to 2010 at Marina's retrospective. The two hadn't seen each other since, and what better way to make an appearance than surprising your long-lost lover at an exhibit celebrating them. Marina's eyes open, and this is the one and only time she's ever broken character. An undeniable smile comes on her face, and after a few seconds, tears follow, with Marina embracing Ule by laying her hands on the table, begging him to do the same. And it's quite telling that the piece that broke Marina was full of love and passion, when the one that should have broke her was full of hate and apathy. And the reason I haven't bothered sharing this story is because, well, when am I going to get another chance to, right? I mean, I found this little detail after I was done researching Rhythm Zero, and to be honest, I like leaving people off with a high note if I can. So I hope I was able to do this one justice and tell the story of Rhythm Zero and how Marina Abramovich managed to persist through a nearly 6-hour session of pain and suffering. Wind turbines. You've probably seen these on long car rides at some point in your life. We know they're meant to do nothing but good, providing a clean alternative to fossil-fueled energy, but these machines don't come without their issues. One of the biggest problems people run into when utilizing wind turbines is how to maintain them, because eventually someone has to work their way up to the top of the turbine to do their routine inspection and make sure that everything is working properly. This one routine checkup is extremely dangerous. It involves climbing for what feels like forever just to get to a very small confined space, and should anything on top of the turbine need repairing, someone needs to be up there to do so. This was a situation on October 29th of 2013. All seemed normal as 4 workers at the Delta Winds wind farm in Oltgensplat, Netherlands, were working at the top of one of their Vesta V66 turbines. They utilized a gondola to get to their place of work at the very top of the turbine. And around 4:55 p.m., the unexpected happened. A circuit shorted in the engine bay, and in an instant, there was a blazing fire, and the worst part, their only escape had just been eaten up by the flames. The 4 men stared down the 220 feet free fall as their only escape was being closed in on by the fire. 2 of the men ended up biting the bullet and just straight up jumped through the flames to the stairwell hatch while the fire was still growing. The other 2 workers, however, hesitated, and just these few moments of hesitation was a difference between safely making it to ground versus the reality of the situation, which was the 2 of them staring down their inevitable death, as they had only one of 2 choices now. Take the easy way out and jump off, or simply wait and hope that the fire didn't get to you before the firefighters did. During this moment of contemplation, the 2 young men, Arjan Cordes, a 21-year-old worker, and Don Koos, a 19-year-old worker, stared as the fire grew bigger and bigger, ultimately deciding that this was most likely the last time either of them would be alive. The 2 seemed to make peace with the situation, and in a last move of serenity, they chose to experience one last hug before delaying the inevitable. I haven't been in a situation, nor can I even attempt to imagine what it was like to be them, but I can tell you how this story makes me feel every time this picture gets thrown my way. There's something so disturbingly comforting about this photo. For me, it feels like the human experience summed up. Right, despite the obvious peril at hand, a simple decision to ignore everything just for a moment for a little bit of human connection is just so tragically beautiful. And I know the aftermath wasn't pretty, as Arjan's body was found a few meters away from the turbine, with Don being found in the stairwell, seemingly making an attempt to jump to the fire as his co-workers did just minutes prior. And just to subside those lingering thoughts, no. There was no other way to get down. A lot of people, myself included, assumed upon reading this that they could parachute down, right? Why not give these workers a parachute or some way to get down free fall style? But that's just not feasible. At the height that they work at, 220 feet in the air is nowhere near enough time to properly open a chute. I mean, the lowest a parachute has ever been opened was 85 feet, and that was done by a professional with decades of experience. If you were to attempt the same thing, even at 220 feet, you'd most likely break your legs upon landing because you'd be going too fast. And I guess broken legs versus your life is a point of discussion, but it's completely irrelevant to this story as of now. I've read elsewhere that the workers had also neglected the main safety feature for turbines like this, which was shown off in a Tom Scott video where they simply rappelled down, and that the 4 workers simply didn't have themselves hooked in to perform this emergency escape. And if that's the case and you're wondering why, well, it's probably the same reason most of us ignore precautions at work. For example, when I used to work at the supermarket, there was this whole protocol for picking up broken glass. I was told to get out a specific paperwork worksheet and this special bucket, and when it actually came down to it and I got those things, my boss laughed at me, and I was told that it wasn't required because how would corporate even know, and why would they even need to know about it? So, like many of us, I conformed, and this was the same here, right? Why plan for something that's extremely unlikely to happen? All it takes is one worker to say, guys, come on, like this isn't going to catch fire, we don't need to have those on. And then suddenly everyone just starts doing it slowly because that's just what we do. That's just what humans do. And if that is the case, I don't think that that's an issue. But that is also just a rumor I read online. It's not confirmed that they were not following any kind of precaution, but even if they weren't, I wanted to include that because I don't think it's right to blame these guys for what happened. I think the far more likely scenario was that the Vesta V66 did not have another way to get down besides the main stairwell and ladder. The reason I say this is because many articles point to this incident as being the cause of other safety precautions being put into place thereafter. I think the worst of the situation was realizing how insanely difficult it would be even now. Fighting fires on the ground is already hard enough, but in the air? That's not a situation entirely. And the firefighters in this instance were told to just let the fire die out on its own, as it showed signs of doing so very early on. The main reason they couldn't do anything about it is because they couldn't make a move on the fire without it seriously putting the firefighters in danger themselves. And so, we're back to this single moment where our John and Don shared one last moment of humanity together. One last hug before the two would be gone forever. I wanted to cover this story because every time I see this photo, it does something to my heart, and when researching it, none of the details seem to be set in stone. So I wanted to come in and clear the air the best I can in regards to this story. Leave a comment below if you feel the same way when seeing this picture, because every time it pops up in my feed or in a random TikTok, it makes me want to get up and go do something instead of rotting away like I normally do. If you made it here, then you made it to the end of today's video. Let me know if you guys ended up liking the topic I chose for this one. I always try to go for stories that I feel some kind of connection to, or I feel like are just not talked about enough, or there's, I guess, some details that just don't add up. And yeah, I know that this niche is like crazy saturated right now, and hopefully this is a breath of fresh air. I know that everything isn't new, and in fact some of these might just be, you know, rehashed cases for all I know, but they were new to me. A lot of them were new to me, and I feel like I brought newer details to the table. So if you feel that way, let me know in the comments below. If not, give me some suggestions. I mean, you have the opportunity right here to tell me what I can talk about and what I shouldn't be talking about. So yeah, I'm just gonna leave it at that. Yeah, well, we'll get straight to the patron shout out. If you are on screen, thank you guys a lot for always supporting me on Patreon. I say it every video. I just can't believe people are still sticking with me. Yeah, I'm finally on a schedule now. Ever since talking to my buddy, he didn't even convince me. I just saw how freaking motivated he was, and I was like, I need to get on this, dude. Yeah, gonna be having a lot more content coming out, a lot of more videos. I have a new series planned that hopefully should be a lot of fun. It's gonna be based all around the Brothers Grimm tales, or the Grimm Brothers tales, which are some of my favorite stories I've ever talked about or learned about. So yeah, that to look forward to. That's gonna be a lot of fun to go over, as well as your regularly scheduled disturbing programming in between. So, you know, not gonna completely jump from that. I do I do like covering this kind of stories, and I feel like I bring something new to it every time I do. So yeah, thank you all for supporting me as much as you do, and I'm gonna just leave it at that. I hope you all have a wonderful day, night, evening, or if you're sleeping, a good night's sleep. Drink some water, just take care of yourself. And with all that said, I will see you all in the next video. Thanks for watching.